Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm going to give just a couple more minutes just to let the last people come filtering in, and then I'll get started. While we're waiting, if you'd like, you could put your name and your organization in the chat so that we know who's here and kind of serve as an introduction. Then we'll get started shortly. Thanks. All right, it looks like our attendees are holding steady. Of course, as I say that, someone immediately joins, but I'll go ahead and get us started. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us for our NOFA focus training, Applying with Confidence, a step-by-step guide to the homeownership development NOFA process. I'm Jessica McKinnon. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Senior Homeownership Development Program Analyst here at OHCS. My role is to manage our direct homeownership development funding programs, and I also run the NOFA. So I'm excited to talk through what our NOFA will look like this year and kick things off next week. Not next week, the week after next. Just a bit of housekeeping. This presentation will be recorded and posted to our website for folks who weren't able to join us today. Because of this, we do ask that you please stay on mute during the call. Please feel free to enter any questions you have into the chat. Our team is here and they'll be happy to answer questions for you there. There will also be a few points during the presentation today where I'll pause for any verbal questions. So at those times, please do raise your virtual hand and I'll call on you to speak. So here's today's agenda. After this brief welcome, I'll talk through the programs that we'll be offering and their requirements, and then I'll dive into the process. If you didn't attend any of our engagement sessions last year, we're moving to a multi-step application process. So most of these will go through that most of the programs will go through that process. If you did attend those meetings, a lot of this will probably be repetitive for you, but repetition does improve understanding. Finally, I have just a couple of slides talking about what you can do now while you wait for the NOFA to launch, and then what you should do after it does. Before we dive into the programs, I wanted to hit some of the big points of the NOFA so that you have an understanding as we talk about those program specifics and how they work into our process. The first is that we're moving to a biennial NOFA. So this NOFA that will launch will cover requirements for 2026 projects and 2027 projects. The second is that in general, this is going to be a first come, first served process. So while we do score your project, that score is going to be compared against a minimum requirement rather than against other applicants. I also wanted to summarize our new application process for you, which is here on the slide. The first step in our process will be to complete our intake form, which will be available online with a link to our website, and the link's also in the NOFA. This will be pretty basic, and it'll just let us know what we need to get you set up in our project management system, which is called Procorum. Once you have access to that system, you'll get access to all of the application documents and forms that'll allow you to complete your concept proposal. The concept proposal is the first step of the true application. It contains about 30 to 50% of the old application, and it's where we determine your first come, first served place in line. At this point, you get to stop and you wait for us. We'll review concept proposals, and if you pass that and we have funding available for you, we'll invite you to complete due diligence. This places a temporary hold on those funds while you work through the remainder of the application and our due diligence requirements. Assuming you meet all of those requirements, we'll move you forward, get your funds officially reserved, close on your funding, and then get you on your way to construction. And with that hopefully really quick summary, I will go into more detail on that later. Let's move on to talk about what programs we're offering, how much funding you can get, and how to get it. This NOFA will include funding from 4 different programs. The first is LIFT, which is kind of our bread and butter. We'll have $100 million in Article 11Q bonds that we can allocate across the biennium. LIFT is a loan that can be satisfied by affordability rather than repayment, and it's available to eligible covenant holders, which I'll define later, using a shared equity model. The second is a pre-development loan program. We have a very specific number of $537,824.50 in general funds that we'll be using to seed a pilot loan program. This will be available to LIFT applicants who qualify as rural, emerging, small, or culturally specific developers, and will be repaid with LIFT dollars when closing on LIFT. The third is the Oregon Affordable Housing Tax Credit. We'll have $2.5 million in tax credits that we can use to reduce the interest rates on permanent loans. This program is available only to limited equity cooperatives and manufactured home parks. The final program, and new to our NOFA, is the Preservation of Manufactured Dwellings program. This lottery-backed bond provides grants to purchase and preserve existing manufactured home parks and are available to tenant committees, co-ops, local governments, and nonprofit organizations. And I wanted to bring up the PMDP program first here and just share that we are transitioning the application from the ORCA to our NOFA. These funds will launch with the January 26th launch of our NOFA, and you can submit an application at any time during the biennium. We'll use the same application that was available in the ORCA, and we'll be awarding the funds on a first-come, first-served process as well. If you're here for this program and not interested in any of the other programs that I listed, then most of this presentation today won't apply to you. All of its requirements are different and it won't follow the same process. We will be reaching out to interested partners over the next 6 months to make future updates. But for now, I'm happy to give you your time back and recommend that you reach out to us directly for more information if you're not already familiar with the program. And if you are interested in our other programs, then I'll go ahead and move us on to LIFT. Now we did do a whole separate training on LIFT and how it works, so I'm going to be a bit brief on some of the items that we've covered there. If you were not able to attend that session but are interested in LIFT, I recommend visiting OHCS's YouTube channel and viewing that recording. It's called LIFT Homeownership 101. Also, Talia will put a link to that in the chat a little bit later in the presentation. But just a quick summary, LIFT is a homeownership development program using Article 11Q bond funds. It supports both rental and homeownership programs, but of course we're going to talk about homeownership today. This has been our most consistent funding source for homeownership development, and while it can be a little challenging to navigate, we're doing our best to make it as accessible as possible. LIFT is designed to be gap funding, meaning that it'll cover a portion of the difference between the cost to build the home and the price that a low to moderate income household can afford to pay. So in this example, you can see that there's a gap of about $250,000. LIFT was able to cover most of that gap, and then the developer used a construction loan that'll be repaid by the sales price and a grant to cover that full cost of construction. And I go into a lot more detail on this in the LIFT presentation, but just wanted to summarize here. I mentioned before that LIFT is a loan. We don't charge any interest, and if you keep the homes affordable for 40 years, that loan is satisfied without any repayment. So if you receive LIFT, we issue pretty standard loan documents, including a first position lien, which we are willing to share with a construction lender. When the homes are built and ready to sell, we'll release the lien on the homes and keep the lien on the land. After 20 years, your loan will come due for repayment. You can absolutely repay and the homes will return to market rate, Or you can sign on for another 20-year affordability period and we'll consider your loan satisfied. And if you're interested in pursuing a lift loan, we do have some specific eligibility requirements for you as an applicant. The first requirement is that the applicant and borrower must be an eligible covenant holder, which is something defined in statute. This includes public and government agencies, nonprofit organizations, co-ops, and federally recognized tribes. If you're here to represent a tribe interested in LIFT, I will note that while you are an eligible covenant holder, we can't support any projects on tribal lands, but we can absolutely support tribal developments elsewhere. We also have some eligibility requirements for your project. We can fund new construction homeownership projects, conversion of non-housing structures to new homeownership housing units, and new manufactured home parks. In addition, your project must use a shared equity model. This is a housing model where an eligible covenant holder maintains ownership of the land, and then the homeowner owns the home. Examples of this include land trusts, leasehold condos, co-ops, limited equity co-ops, and manufactured home parks. Homes that are funded by LIFT must also be reserved for households earning below 80% AMI, though you can have some other higher income homes in the project. LIFT can only be used on capitalized construction costs, which is most of your costs, but not all of them. And then you can't have started vertical construction yet. And if you're not an eligible covenant holder or not interested in the long-term maintenance of a shared equity model, but still interested in LIFT, please take a look at that recorded LIFT training as well as we go over some partnership models that can still work for our program. We're asked sometimes about scattered sites and if they're eligible as a single project or if we need multiple applications. I'll say in general, we would prefer that scattered sites be submitted as multiple applications, but we understand there are some situations where submitting it as one project makes sense. And I won't go through this long list today, but I want you to know that it is in the NOFA. If you think you have a scattered site project that makes sense as a single cohesive project, take a look at this list and definition in the NOFA, and then please reach out to us just to make sure that it meets our requirements before you put in too much work on your application. We do have a few special eligibility criteria. You may see it referred to in some parts of the NOFA as RESCs or RESCS. That stands for Rural, Emerging, Small, and Culturally Specific. Of course, all of these definitions are in the NOFA as well. Rural can be determined based on a web map, which we'll provide with the NOFA publication. Emerging are applicants new to LIFT. Small developers have limited staff and build less than 6 homes per year. And then culturally specific organizations provide culturally relevant services to a specific cultural community. And then they need to meet a very specific set of characteristics that are written out in the NOFA. And for the purposes of receiving additional benefits, small and emerging developers cannot submit applications for more than 15 homes each year. If you have a larger project, you are absolutely welcome to submit that. You just won't be eligible for those extra benefits. Our other special eligibility criteria is based on the geography of your development. As we work to better serve the entirety of Oregon, we do have some additional benefits for projects being built in counties that haven't received a lot of LIFT homeownership dollars. So we have this list of eligible counties here. This list is also in the NOFA. And this list will remain the same across the entirety of the NOFA. So the definition is 20 or fewer homes. If we get a project funding 20 homes in an underserved or 25 homes in an underserved development, that county will still be considered underserved until the end of this NOFA and we move into the next one. While we do know that we're going to have $100 million this biennium, we don't actually have $100 million until the bonds are sold, and that'll happen across the whole 2-year period. So to make sure that we're not spending money that we don't have, most of our LIFT dollars will be issued in 2 separate offerings. We'll release the first $37.5 million when the NOFA launches on January 26th. These funds will only be available to projects that can potentially or will be able to close on the lift loan by February 2027. And those projects are welcome to apply for the first come, first serve process. If you won't be able to close by February 2027, but will be able to close by December 2027, you can apply for our 2027 funding. And that'll be another $37.5 million released in September of 2026. If you're interested in that, you can apply at any time and we'll hold on to your application until the new funding launches. In September, we'll reset our first come, first serve wait list. We'll take all of those early applications as well as any 2026 applications that didn't receive funds, and we'll treat them like they applied on the first day. While this round is technically first come, first served in practice, it will probably need to have a substantial tiebreaker across all of those applications. So what does that look like on the process graphic I showed earlier? If you were a 2026 project and you're selected for funds, you'll just follow this the way that I presented it. But what if you're a 2026 project that didn't get an award because we ran out of funds? We would keep your application on file, and then when we released the next round of funding for 2027 projects, we'd automatically consider your application in that day one tiebreaker with no need for any action on your part. If you're selected this time, you'll move forward into the 2027 due diligence process, and then on to that reservation and closing. Now, what if you're a 2027 project and you're submitting your application early? We will take your concept proposal, we'll review it, we'll make sure that you meet all of our requirements, and then we'll keep your successful application stored. When the next round of funding launches in September, we will also automatically consider your application in that day one tiebreaker. Then if you're accepted, we'll move you forward into the 2027 round of due diligence and move you to reservation and closing. Also considering the biennial offering, we'll have a few set-aside categories each year based on some of those special designations. So our regular NOFA will include these two rows in green here. Our categories include a set-aside for partners who meet the definitions for small, emerging, or culturally specific developers and projects in counties underserved by LIFT. Our second category will include everyone else. Each of the two launches will separately be split into these two categories, with 40% of funds going to the special category and then 60% going to everyone else. Those set-asides will remain split until the date that we stop accepting concept proposals for that year, and those dates are in the NOFA. At that point, if there's anything left in one of those categories, we'll roll it into the other category to help get those funds allocated and spent in a timely manner, rather than holding them for a whole 2-year-long period. We'll also have a separate offering for factory-produced housing that will only be available for 2026 projects, and I'll share a little bit more on this one later. Now, the way that we determine your LIFT award is based on your project. We award a specific subsidy per unit based on the number of bedrooms in that unit. So the table here shows that you could be awarded a minimum of $165,000 for a studio home, up to $225,000 for a 4-bedroom home, and then beyond that, you can receive an additional $20,000 for each extra bedroom. Rural partners can also receive an additional $5,000 per unit up to $100,000 extra. And also please note that this is the maximum award that you can receive. During our due diligence phase, we'll review your pro forma for this development. We'll need to see that you have at least one other source of funds to cover costs that LIFT won't, and then to ensure that you're using our program appropriately as gap financing. We'll determine that we'll determine your award based on a maximum profit, so you can't earn more than 14%, including profit, developer fee, and any consultant fees for tasks that would typically be done by a developer. We'll also require an appraisal for your developments, your LIFT award, plus any debt on the project, like construction loan, must not exceed the value of the final completed project. Finally, since this award is based on your units, you must notify us if your unit count or the number of bedrooms in your units changes. If this happens, we may need to reduce your award. So please ensure that you've done all your due diligence and that you're confident in your site plan and unit mix. Now, because funding is limited and we need to invest in a diversity of projects, we will have a cap on the amount of funding that you can receive across the biennium. This is a cap on the total dollar amount, not a cap on a project maximum or the number of applications. So for example, if you're in the first column, you could submit a single $16 million project to $8 million projects or 16 $1 million projects, whatever works for you. What your cap is depends on a number of factors. The highest cap of $16 million is for experienced Lyft partners who've already completed a project, either with us or with Lyft Rental. They haven't had any major leadership changes in the last 2 years, and you need to meet a specific experience and capacity requirement. An experienced developer can receive up to $14 million. To be eligible for this cap, you need to meet certain experience requirements or hire an experienced development consultant who can meet those requirements. All other applicants will have a biennial cap of $10 million. Now, before we switch gears and before I pause for questions, I wanted to talk really briefly about the factory-produced housing set-aside. This is a set-aside required by statute for both homeownership and rental, where OHCS must fund 5 projects up to $25 million in lift and provide some additional technical assistance specific to factory-produced housing. Both homeownership and rental departments have set aside a full $25 million to meet this requirement. Once awards are determined, anything left will roll back into the respective programs. This program is overseen by an advisory committee that'll determine the specific selection criteria, and the funding and application are expected to launch in the first quarter of 2026. The way this program will work is that you'll need to complete a small extra form focused on that selection criteria. The criteria will be competitive. If you receive this funding, you'll need to complete our full NOFA process still to make sure that you meet all of our due diligence requirements. And if you're
Hey,
interested
Jessica.
yeah, Talia.
Oh, sorry. Finished the FPH, and then I just wanted to pause you for a few questions in the chat.
Yeah, no problem. All right, yeah, if you're interested in this funding source and still unsure how it works, I wanted to share a recommendation for how to approach it. When this NOFA launches that I'm presenting today, you should apply both the intake and the concept proposal. This will put you in our queue regardless of the factory produced set aside. There is a chance that we'll have already selected who will move on to due diligence before the factory produced funding is released. You may be recommended to complete due diligence at this point, or you may not. When the factory produced funding releases, they'll just have that extra form for you, not a full application. If you're eligible for the factory produced set aside and interested in it, I recommend filling that out, whether or not you've already received due diligence. Once OHCS and the advisory committee make determinations on awards, if you're not already invited to complete due diligence, then we'll send you an invitation to complete it. If you're already in the process of completing due diligence, then you just continue as normal. We'll move some things around on the back end to make sure that you get that set aside. And then the funds that were previously allocated to you can instead go to the person next in line. You can apply for the Factory Produced Housing Fund without applying to our NOFA, though we don't recommend that because it would put you behind and there's always a risk of not meeting our initial criteria. But if that is the case, then you'll need to submit a concept proposal for us to review, and then we'll recommend you to due diligence. So that, I guess, this is the good pause point. So go ahead, Talia, what's in the chat?
Great. Thank you, Jessica. Okay, let's go with this one. For the biennial cap, is it a firm-wide successful completion of a lift project, or is it acceptable if it's an individual at the firm that has completed a lift project?
It is firm-wide, not an individual. So
Great,
your
thank you.
organization needs to have completed it.
And then I answered this in the chat, but I just wondered if you wanted to elaborate anything else. For the developer fee, is it 14% of the award or of the total project cost? It's of total project cost, but I don't know if you want to elaborate on how we're going to calculate that.
Oh, I don't have that on the top of my head, but
Okay.
there is a formula in the NOFA that tells you exactly how we calculate the total project cost. Um, but I'm pretty sure it's just everything. Everything that you would include in your pro forma is your total project cost.
Great, thank you. And then there's a few coming in about the factory produced housing set aside, which I can answer. Um, there is a question, is the FPH set aside satisfied once 5 projects are funded, regardless of if they total 25 million? The bill HB 3145 says up to 5 projects. Um, so it is most likely, it could be either or. It could be once we hit 5 projects, or it could be once we hit 25 million. We know that in the criteria that's being developed right now, our goal is to fund at least one affordable rental housing project and one home ownership project. So at minimum, we'll fund 2 projects, but up to 5. So still a little murky right now, Joe. And then Scott asks, is the 25 million reserved for home ownership? Is there a chance that rental commits 25 million first and then what happens? So it's 25 million total spread across home ownership and rental. We're each putting aside 25 million since we don't know the composition of the projects. But whatever is, since there will definitely be a rental project and definitely a home ownership project, whatever isn't used for home ownership among the 25 million that we've reserved will go back into the general pool. Hopefully that's not too complicated and that answers your question. And then Amy has a question about timeline and tiebreaker points. I think we'll get to that. So, Amy, if you want to, you can put your question in the chat, and if it doesn't get answered, then we'll make sure we get to it. Thanks, Jessica.
Yeah. And I just wanted to flag on your response to Scott's question, the NOFA has actually a really detailed explanation for when the factory produced funds come back, since we don't know what timing it'll be between the 2 years. We have this really specific decision tree on, will it go to 2026 wait list? Will it go to 2027 wait list? Which set asides will it go to? So keep an eye out for that in the NOFA. Are there any other questions that anyone wants to raise their hand and ask, or otherwise I'm happy to keep going. All right, seeing none, then I'll move us forward. All right, so next are our other programs offered in this NOFA. The first is that this year we're piloting a revolving pre-development loan program. Eligible rural, small, emerging, and culturally specific applicants can receive up to $50,000 to support pre-development expenses. This program is currently only available to organizations that apply for LIFT and are invited to complete due diligence. There isn't a separate application, just a few extra questions in your concept proposal. These loans will also be awarded on a first come, first served basis. If all of the funds that we have are issued to 2026 projects, it's possible that we won't have any additional funding available in 2027 in case some of those 2026 projects revolve quickly. If we go back to that multi-step application process, you'll receive your pre-development funding early in that due diligence process. And there are some loan terms that'll be ironed out in your loan agreements. You'll be able to receive up to $50,000 with 0% interest. though there will be a $1,000 closing charge that you'll need to pay with a different funding source. The way this loan works is that you'll be able to sign your loan agreement early in that due diligence process. You can then make draw requests to cover any eligible expenses during that time. And when you close on your lift loan, you can use some of those lift dollars to repay the loan through escrow. If something happens and you're not able to close on lift, you'll have a full 24-month term to pay it back. This should give you enough time to reapply for lift and close the following year. If you're not able to receive lift, you'll need to repay the loan at the end of the 24 months or earlier. And there are a lot of eligible expenses for this loan. You can use it on various professional services like architecture and engineering, any of the studies that you need to do in pre-development. You can use it to pay for most fees, though do note that you cannot use this funding to pay for any charges or fees brought by any state of Oregon entities, including OHCS. You can spend these dollars on community engagement efforts, as well as any costs that can be reasonably connected to getting your project ready to start construction and don't otherwise break any of our rules. And then last but not least, this program is the Oregon Affordable Housing Tax Credit, or OAHTC. This program provides tax credits to a lender who offers your project up to a 4% reduction of interest rate on a permanent loan. Of course, most homeownership projects don't use a permanent loan, so this program's only available to limited equity co-ops and manufactured home parks. Eligible projects can submit an OAHTC application as part of their lift due diligence to obtain that early commitment for when the project is complete. And that'll just be a special form asking OAHTC related questions, detailed operating budget, and information to determine your eligible funding. Already constructed eligible projects can just submit the OEHTC application along with a few additional documents to just receive that tax credit without all of the work of the big full application process for LIFT. Are there any questions about the pre-development loan or OEHTC before I move forward?
No questions in the chat, Jessica.
Great, thank you. All right, then let's move on to the more step-by-step specifics of the new application process. And I'll get us started with intake and the concept proposal. So intake is just a simple online form. Any applicant or any program, any applicant for any program will be required to fill this form out, and you need to fill the form out separately for each project that you'll be submitting. There will be a link in the NOFA and on our website that will connect you to this form. It'll ask what programs you're applying for, and then it'll be responsive to that. So you won't need to answer questions that aren't related to your project or your application. The questions in this form will be mostly basic questions that'll assess the highest level of eligibility, like if you're an eligible covenant holder or using a shared equity model for LIFT. The information you provide will help us get your project set up in our system and make sure you're given the tasks and documents that make sense for you. And then the information also gives us data that we can use to make projections and plan our time to ensure that we're responsive to everybody during the application cycle. We do ask that you please submit your intake form as soon as you know that you're interested, or even if you're still a little unsure. There's no commitment and no charge to doing so. So if you submit this form and you don't end up submitting an application, there isn't any sort of penalty or anything like that. Once you've passed our intake process, we'll get you set up in Procorum, which is our application and project management system. We'll go a little deeper into this in the next training, but just as a quick summary, you'll receive two different work centers. The first is called a partner portal, and this is like your profile in our system. So it's where you can upload documents that are more specific to your organization than to the project, like your bylaws and your financials. This gives you one place to upload and store those documents rather than having to upload the same document multiple times to different applications and projects. So if you're that organization submitting 16 $1 million projects, you'll only need to upload your bylaws one time to this work center. If you applied last year, you'll already have a work center or a partner portal, and your responsibility will just be to upload anything new and make sure that everything there is still accurate and up to date. The other work center you'll receive will be the project work center, and you'll receive this regardless of which program you're applying for. This will have all of your project specific information like your application, your site plan, your contractor, things like that. This work center will also stick with you through the life of the project, so possibly 40 years. There will be folders in here that'll have the blank application, blank forms, announcements, guidance, other resources. So definitely take a tour when you receive it. The last and maybe most important point is that your project work center is going to have a task labeled submit, and this is how you submit your application. Once you have all of the documents uploaded, you'll need to check that box, and please leave it checked. Don't uncheck it because then it'll forget what date you checked the box the first time. Um, um, and we'll actually be using that date when you check the box to determine the first come, first served decision. If you're not sure which document goes in which work center, we will have a list for you in the application workbook that specifically tells you which document goes in which work center. Now, a quick note, everything up until now has been free. We will not charge you anything for processing intake or getting your work center set up, but once you reach the concept proposal stage, you will start seeing our charges. Before you submit your concept proposal, you'll need to pay an application charge. The amount will be based on the number of units or the program that you're applying for. For this, we'll create an invoice and upload it to your project work center. And the same will be true for all of the other charges here. OHCS will create an invoice for you with instructions on how to pay that online, or in some of the cases through escrow. If you receive a pre-development loan, you'll need to pay those closing costs that I mentioned. If you're invited to complete due diligence, you'll need to pay a recipient charge based on your award to move forward. Then if you're selected for funding, we'll have a reservation charge of 2% of your LIFT loan, document preparations charges per document, and pass-through charges from DOJ. And all of these will typically be handled through escrow at closing, but you may get an invoice for DOJ fees after closing, depending on the timing of everything and how much negotiation you need for your project. Please note that LIFT cannot pay for any of these charges, so you'll need to use a different funding source. Now, just to give you a little context before we talk about the concept proposal specifically, we approach reviewing the NOFA in two ways. The first is the administrative review. In this review, we make sure that the application is complete and all the forms are signed. We make sure that you meet all of our pass-fail criteria, and we go through any documents and make sure that those meet our needs. These are typically done by one OHCS staff member or split among us, and then I'll do an extra review of any items that might have been flagged as an issue. And here I wanted to note that moving forward into the presentation, when we talk about documents, these are going to be LIFT's required documents. OHTC and PMDP will also have required documents, but the list is significantly smaller. So in these cases, please refer to your own specific application materials. Next, we have what we call the threshold review. And this is our scoring system, which we break down into 6 categories that'll show up later in the presentation. These items will be reviewed by a scoring committee. At least 2 OHCS staff members will review and score your application, and then they'll present any recommendations or concerns to a larger committee of scorers. And then just of note, there's not a threshold review for PMDP or OAHTC only applications. Just a few extra details on the threshold review. The first is just a reminder that this is not a competitive score. I mentioned that there are 6 categories. Instead of competing with other applicants, you'll need to meet a minimum score in each of those categories. Second is that those minimum scores will vary from project to project. If you meet a definition for rural, emerging, small, or culturally specific, you'll have a lower minimum score that you need to meet. We'll also internally complete a risk review of your organization and funding amount that you've received over time, and use that to set your minimum score for any financial criteria during due diligence. And a copy of our risk review will be published with the NOFA, so you'll know what we're looking for. I also just wanted to share that you should approach the scoring with some flexibility. It's easy to get stuck in the competitive mindset and think that you need to be able to earn every single point that's available, but I don't want you to think that way for this application. Instead, consider all of the questions just a different pathway to meet that minimum requirement. So don't stress if any of the questions don't apply to you. It is okay to miss some points as long as you reach that minimum threshold. So let's dive into the concept proposal. This is everything that you need to submit. If you've seen previous applications before we move to this multi-step process, you might recognize that this list is pretty short, and I'm pretty excited about that. This is going to be our administrative review, just making sure that we receive all of these documents and they meet our needs. Most of these documents are forms that'll be provided by us, so you'll need to complete the application workbook, which is in an Excel format. The same with the partner experience workbook, which will ask about your development and stewardship experience. You'll need to complete a site review checklist, which is a fairly long document asking about your site's feasibility. The next 3 are all simple forms requiring limited information and signatures, and then we'll need to see that you've paid the application charge. From your own documents, we'll want to see 2 years of financial statements, organizational documents, proof that you're legally practicing business in Oregon, evidence of site control, your preliminary site plan, and then resumes, MOUs, and contracts that'll just be related to what was listed in your application workbook. We're going to review 3 of those 6 thresholds during this concept proposal, and all of this will be in that application workbook and the partner experience workbook. We'll look at your capacity to make sure that you have the space and funding to complete the project. We'll look at your experience to make sure that you have a history or partnerships to successfully complete the project. And then we'll look at your history of stewardship and experience with your shared equity model to make sure that you're properly set up to manage the project for the next 40 years. We'll also ask you to answer 3 kind of longer narrative questions that'll just directly relate to the other 3 threshold categories. These will be pass-fail. It'll help us make sure that you're on the right track to moving forward and likely capable of moving through the due diligence thresholds. I think this is another good spot to pause and see if there are any more questions that I can answer.
Yeah, there is one okay, there's a few in the chat. Can deferred development fees count as other funding and be used to pay OHCS fees at closing or reimburse someone who paid those fees out of pocket?
That's a good question. So Lyft dollars cannot be like specifically transferred to us, but if you are using your own equity, for example, as an investment to pay that, and then later draw a developer fee, I think that that is a little circuitous enough to work. But definitely reach out to me with more specifics for what you're thinking if you're having any concerns on that. And we can make sure that it meets all of our bond requirements.
Thanks, Jessica. Okay, we've got a few more questions here. Can you put the 2025 criteria in the chat? I trying to copy a document into the chat. It's not working. So let us send that to you. If you, sorry, Bill, I feel like we said this to you last training, but if anybody is interested in a specific PDF document, we can send it to you. Just email us at hodevelopment@hsc. I'm going to put it in the chat. We are going through a big change that mandated federally. We have to update our website for ADA compliance, and part of that means that we're not allowed to have any PDFs on our website, which is pretty frustrating. But so we can send you any PDF that you want. Just email us. And then Jessica, Joe asks, do you need team resumes specifically, or are short relevant bios acceptable?
Yeah, short relevant bios are acceptable. Just saving space on the slide. Yeah, you can definitely submit a bio. And then to the previous question, Talia, I think the previous NOFA scoring criteria are still available on the NOFA page. I don't know for how long. It might be less than a week that it's still there. So if you have the link to that and you want to grab it like today or tomorrow, definitely should still be there.
Oh, you're right. It is still up there. So I'm just going to put it in the chat right now. So no need to email us. You can find it there. Cool. And then here's another question for you, Jessica. I assume since the pro forma is required at due diligence, the Excel applicant workbook in the work center for the concept proposal will not include the sources and uses tab. Is that correct?
Yep, that is correct.
And then permanent loan counts as other sources of funding, so that could qualify to pay the fees. Yes, a construction loan or permanent loan would qualify as another source of funding to pay the fees. Good questions, everyone. Any others? Oh, okay, here we go. When submitting a funding request in the concept proposal, how much flexibility is there to adjust the requested amount if changes occurred during due diligence?
So what you apply for at concept proposal is going to be the maximum that you can get, because that is what we will reserve for you. So if something changes and it goes up, we will not be able to increase what we're tentatively holding for you. If something happens, like you need to reduce the number of units or shrink a couple of the homes, we can reduce your award. That's not a problem, and kind of move that award on to the next person. But definitely when applying for your concept proposal, make sure that you're asking for as much as you could potentially be eligible for. Anything else?
People are welcome to come off mute and ask questions aloud. Maybe we can pause and see if anyone wants to ask a question, but there's nothing else in the chat.
Okay.
All right. Well,
I have kind of
a
a crazy question that I'm hesitant to say out loud, but so we are trying really hard. We have an acre of land. We're trying really hard to figure out how to fund 17 modular units, townhomes on this site. But we would need to identify, in addition to lift, another $3 million. If we aren't able to identify that 3 million, then we would switch to 9 single-family manufactured homes. If we were to apply for 17 modular and then have to change to 9 manufactured, would that still just be considered a decrease in the number of units?
That's a good question. I think in the normal track of our work, we would take that change offline and talk about it among our team before we could make a decision. So maybe let us do that and get back to you, Lucinda.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Good question.
Here's another question. Are partner MOUs required at concept proposal or due diligence?
We have moved them to be due at concept proposal. So if you were in the previous trainings, we used to have them in due diligence, but they're in the concept proposal now. Yeah, go ahead, Amy.
Hi, Jessica. Am I of the right understanding that only applications that you have the ability to fund at concept proposal will be asked to move forward?
I'll say it's like the applications used to be, where we'll want to see, we'll do an evaluation of your pro forma, and part of that will be how much of the funding is already committed. You do need to identify potential sources to fund the whole project like you used to. The big change, though, is that you will need to have 100% of the sources committed and financed by the end of due diligence and before we recommend you to Housing Stability Council. In the past, we did that after Housing Stability Council, so we just shifted that forward.
Okay. So my follow-up question, again, defer it if you're going to cover this, but if at concept proposal, the non-rural, non-underserved urban bucket is doubly subscribed, and there's a reasonable likelihood that all of those concept proposals come in between 8 and 5 o'clock on the night. How they're all considered first for first come, first serve. Only you have, is that when tiebreaker points start to kick in?
Yes, it is. And I actually kind of walk through that process in the next section, actually. So I'll go into a little bit more detail and then, no, that's fine. That's great. If you have any more questions after that, or if I don't answer your question.
Wait. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. All right, for the sake of time, I'll go ahead and move us forward just to make sure we can cover the whole presentation. Yep, so moving forward to project selection and how we decide which concept proposals will move forward to due diligence. You've heard a few times now that this is a first come, first serve NOFA, but what does that really mean? Who comes first is determined by the date that you submit your concept proposal in Procorum, like Amy said. And remember that this is that submit task. Do not forget to click your submit task. We'll only be considering the date of your submission, not the time. So take your time, double check everything before submitting, and just make sure that you click that submit button before 11:59 p.m. Once your application is submitted and reviewed, if we find any issues like missing documents or concerns with your threshold scoring, we'll let you know and give you 10 days to cure the issue. Of course, the cure period is only for projects submitted in good faith, not ones that were clearly submitted incomplete just to get an earlier submission date. Please don't do that to us. And then any applications submitted on that same day will go through our tiebreaker process. Our initial tiebreaker is going to look at some of our priorities, which fall into 4 sort of bigger categories. We'll look for projects that have done a good job leveraging other funding, projects that are serving wildfire impacted areas, projects with diverse developers, geographies, or home types, and projects that prioritize energy efficiency, sustainability, and accessibility. And this will just be a tab in your application workbook that asks you a series of mostly multiple choice or yes or no questions. Based on these responses and other information, the workbook will give you a score, which we'll use to break ties for applications submitted or for concept proposals submitted on the same day. The actual tiebreaker criteria and what happens if 2 projects also have the same tiebreaker score All of those details will be published with the NOFA. So now that we have everyone organized based on date and tiebreaker score, we'll start assigning our available funds based on the set-asides, beginning at the first in line and then continuing back until we run out of funds. If you're selected for funding, you'll receive an invitation to complete due diligence, and then you'll need to sign an agreement stating that you agree to adhere to all of our deadlines. If you're next in line, but either we don't have funding or we don't have enough funding for your whole project, we may select you as an alternate. You'll be invited to complete due diligence in advance so that you're already ready and on track as funding may come available. We'll, of course, be flexible on deadlines based on how the alternate process is going. And then if your project isn't fully funded, we'll consider you to be the first in line for the next round of LIFT, assuming we receive LIFT funding from the legislature. If we run out of funds and you are not selected as an alternate, then you get to stop and you don't need to do any more work on our application. If you're selected as an alternate and you have a large project, we may approach you with some different strategies that'll both give you the benefit of being an alternate while also ensuring that our funding doesn't sit on a shelf for a year collecting dust. All of these are theoretical. We tried to build some infrastructure that'll allow us both some structure and some flexibility once we actually have the projects in front of us and need to make decisions. But there are three main options. The first is that we may be able to forward allocate funding from the next year to your project. This will let your full project get through our processes and close on the loan. You just won't be able to actually use the forward allocated funds until the next year when the bond sale happens and we actually have those dollars. The second is that you can try to phase your project. If there's an easy break point in your project, we can award funding for that portion so that you can close and you can actually get started on construction of that phase. We'll provide a conditional guarantee of funding for the next year, and that will allow us to use any other funds that are left over after that first phase to support another smaller project. You can also choose to defer your entire project to the next year. Similar to phasing, you'll receive a conditional guarantee of funds for the following year, and then we'll distribute what we have among smaller projects on our wait list. Now, at some points, there may be an opportunity for more funding to come into the NOFA. This could be if a project in due diligence withdraws, doesn't meet requirements, or ends up needing less funding than we reserved. More funding could come when the factory produced set-aside ends, or if any projects funded in previous years need to return their LIFT funds. In these cases, we've set up some rules for how those funds will be distributed, considering our wait lists. First, all funds will be broken into the two set-asides. If there are any alternates waiting on funding, those dollars will go to fund the alternates. If the alternates are fully funded, then those dollars will either move to the next person on the wait list if we're still accepting proposals that year, or they'll be included in the next round of funding if we've already closed concept proposals. So Scott, this is that decision tree that I was talking about. This ensures that whoever is selected will have enough time to complete due diligence. I guess this is another good pause point. Are there any questions about our selection process? Amy, did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Great.
Jessica, we have a question that I've been just doing a little research to try to answer, but maybe you have a more specific answer than me. Carly asks, I looked briefly, but I couldn't find the source for designated wildfire impacted areas. There used to be a map up on Oregon.gov. Can we share how we're defining it? And I know we're defining it as an area impacted by a wildfire in 2020 or later. But this maybe doesn't get specific enough to what you're asking. Does that is that specific enough, Carly, or do you want something more specific, like the entire county, or yeah?
I think that that helps. Yeah, 2020 impacted or sooner area. I guess is it like within the county or like a specific town or I because I'm like anything Eastern Oregon to me seems like a wildfire impact zone, but yeah, I didn't know if there was something specific.
That's a really good question. I don't think we have it as countywide. I think we'll want it to be a little more specific than that, but yeah, we don't have a deeper definition yet. So that's a good thing that we can take back. Thanks for that question.
And here's another question from Amy. Does the over 5 million pause and request happen at the concept proposal phase?
Amy, are you talking about the speed bump that we talked about in the engagement?
As soon as your request exceeds 5 million, even if it's over 5 million, there's a pause to apply again.
Okay. That didn't make it into the NOFA. So you can forget about what you heard during last year. That's not going to happen this year.
Okay, thank you for confirming.
Yep, no problem. There's no speed bump at $5 million. All right, I'll keep us going.
Jessica, one more question. Sorry,
sure.
if you don't mind clarifying. When are tiebreakers applied? It's after administrative and threshold scoring reviews, but I think you might just want to say a little bit more about the nuance there.
Oh yeah, so we'll do the administrative and threshold reviews. We'll make sure that your project passes. If it doesn't, we'll do the cure period and get you fully passed. And then once all of the projects in that one day have been concept proposal reviewed, and cure perioded, and we've all decided if it's going to move forward or not, then we will look at the tiebreaker score and kind of sort everyone in that day by the tiebreaker score. And then that's when we'll start going down the list and awarding funds. Go ahead, Scott.
Thanks. All right, I have lots of tiebreaker questions, but I know those will probably be in the NOFA. But one specifically, it's talking about leveraging other funds. But if the tiebreaker is after the concept proposal and we're not doing pro formas until due diligence, how is that going to work as far as looking at project funding?
Yeah, so in the tiebreaker, we kind of ask yes or no preliminary questions. So the biggest of the leveraging other funds is what percentage of the amount of lift you're eligible for that you're actually asking. So the application will ask you your unit mix and it'll decide based on what you're telling us your units are, you're eligible for $5 million. And if you're only asking for $3 million, then we can have an assumption that you're leveraging other funds or something else to help you request lower amounts of funding. The other leveraging is like specific local resources, and we just ask you if you are using any of these sources and just a brief place for you to explain what they are. And then in the first part of due diligence, we'll ask you to actually like give us your award letter or verify that you are actually receiving that. And of course, if anyone lies on their tiebreaker, we will take you out of due diligence and give those funds to someone else. Please do not lie in your tiebreaker. All right. Yeah, again, for the sake of time, I'll move forward. Please feel free to put more questions in the chat, and then I'll have another pause point soon. Due diligence, reservation, and closing. So due diligence will kick off with this invitation to complete due diligence. This will be an official letter on letterhead letting you know that you've been selected to complete due diligence and that we are conditionally holding a certain amount of funding for you. It'll list those conditions as well as all of the deadlines that you'll need to adhere to. And it'll also notify you if you were selected to receive a pre-development loan, or if we're looking to move you forward for an OEHTC award. Our hope is that you can use this letter with other funds as sort of a letter of interest to show that you've been selected and are working towards funding. Please do note, though, that the funding being conditionally held is different from it being reserved. An official reservation of funds comes after approval by Housing Stability Council and carries a greater level of commitment. This is more an administrative promise that we won't award those funds to anyone else unless you either receive an actual reservation, or until you either receive an actual reservation or you're denied. We'll send this letter via email and also post it into your Procorum Work Center. And at the same time, we'll make a whole bunch of updates to your systems. So your Procorum Work Center will be updated with the new tasks and folders relating to your due diligence requirements. And then we'll also update your application workbook with new tabs. So there's a question earlier about the Proforma or the sources and uses tabs. You won't have those during your concept proposal, but we will add them to your workbook and send it to you with all the new tabs once you enter into due diligence. The other thing your invitation will do is connect you to your development officer, who will complete the majority of your due diligence review and will be a great resource to help walk you through the process and answer any questions you have. Susie Sandstrom and Elizabeth Thomas are our two LIFT development officers. And then if you're receiving OEHTC or a pre-development loan, then Tasha Worth will be your resource for those specific programs. The due diligence phase is broken into 3 stages, all building on each other and with increasing deadlines. The first stage serves as a kickoff of due diligence and focuses on the remaining threshold requirements. That one has a soft deadline of 60 days after your invitation to complete due diligence. We can move faster than that, of course, and we're also not going to rescind your funding here because a couple of documents are late, but we do want you to generally progress at the recommended rate or faster. Stage 2 will focus on some of the major risk factors of a project, especially those that may take time to resolve if any issues are found. This one also has a soft deadline at 120 days after your invitation to complete due diligence. Stage 3 will focus on high barrier items, either in cost or time, so that you'll have plenty of time to complete those items during the full process. And this one has a hard deadline based on if you're a 2026 project or a 2027 project, and you will need to have all of the documents submitted by this point. The last big task for you will be closing on your LIFT loan. That also has a hard deadline based on the year of funding that you apply for, or that you're selected for funding. And I want to highlight this again and note that this is really the first time that we've been really prescriptive about this, but it's really becoming necessary as our program has grown and as we're moving to this biennial approach that we make sure that our funds are going to the projects that are actually ready to go and will have homes on the ground quickly. So we will rescind funds if these deadlines aren't met or if you're not progressing through due diligence at an acceptable rate. And I don't want to have to do that. So please, please, please take these deadlines seriously. So let's run through what's actually involved in each of those steps. Hopefully we've broken them into good bite-sized chunks for you. During stage 1, we'll want to have a kickoff call where we meet with you and learn more about your project and discuss expectations. You'll need to fill out a few OHCS-related forms. The first is that acknowledgement of deadlines, which we'll want ASAP. We'll need you to confirm the updated application workbook, which will contain our more narrative-heavy thresholds, your pro forma, and an operating budget. This will be most of the work for this stage. We'll also need you to get our evidence of zoning form filled out by your local jurisdiction. And then with those, you'll need to send us your construction cost estimates, evidence of any funding sources that have already been committed, and we may ask for evidence of one or more of your tiebreaker responses, like I mentioned earlier. Once we received all of these documents, we'll bring your project to the scoring committee to review the last 3 threshold categories. This one will look at your project details to ensure that you're building to a high quality that's desirable to your home buyers. We'll ensure that your project has taken steps to ensure that your project can equitably serve populations that are underserved in homeownership. And then we'll also make sure that your project is financially viable and has planned for risks. Stage 2 will have a few tasks to complete. The first will be paying that recipient charge. This will be due after you pass the threshold review in stage 1, so you won't need to pay this if you don't pass the scoring. If you received a pre-development loan, this is also when we'd like you to close on it, but feel free to close on it earlier as well. We'll also want you to pull together all your stakeholders, especially your lender, to talk through requirements and make sure everybody's on the same page. At this stage, we'll also want you to send us a copy of the FEMA flood map, a wetlands map, a letter from BOLI determining whether or not your project is required to provide prevailing wage, your completed phase 1 environmental study, and a preliminary title report. The goal here is that if any of your stakeholders have concerns or if there are any red flags in any of those reports, there should still be time to resolve it before the hard due diligence deadline. Stage 3 of due diligence wraps everything up and brings in those high barrier, costly, or time-consuming items. So for tasks at this stage, we'll want you and hopefully your construction lender to have reviewed our loan document templates to make sure that there aren't any major concerns and you don't have any edits. We don't require that you have a build permit before application, but if another funder does, then we do want you to submit your permit application at this point. We'll also require you to update your bylaws by this stage if they don't already meet our dissolution statement requirements. And we'll let you know if that's the case. Otherwise, you can just assume that they're fine. We'll want you to submit an updated pro forma and operating budget with costs closer to actuals, and then the sources updated to actual committed sources. And at this stage, as I mentioned, we'll be rolling into closing soon, so we'll want 100% of your sources to be committed. Then if you're applying for OAHTC in addition to LIFT, we'll want your OAHTC application as well. For your documents, we'll want to see proof of all of your committed sources. We'll want to see an appraisal that meets our requirements, which will be explained in detail in the NOFA. We'll want to see elevation drawings, your ground lease, your fair housing resolution, and proof that your general contractor is able to practice in Oregon. If any of your other funders will be putting a covenant on the property, we'll want to know about those. And then we may want some additional risk mitigation. If you applied in 2025, you may recall that we had a section of checkboxes where you could elect to provide additional risk mitigation for points just in advance as part of your application. We've since identified some problems with that approach, so instead of letting you just offer it up front, we'll ask for it if we decide that we need it. So we may ask for additional risk mitigation if, for example, you can't meet threshold requirements in a single category, if you're identified as high risk in our risk analysis, if your project is a lot bigger than your development history supports, or some other maybe project-specific risks. If your project needs something, we may request things like a guarantor for the lift loan or the construction loan, performance bond. We may request that we update the loan documents to allow recourse on your assets, or we may require you to maintain a certain liquidity. We'll determine which of those options would meet our needs and then present them to you, and then you can choose which one of those options works best for your organization. And then the last step in the process is reservation and closing. Once you finish your due diligence requirements, we'll take your project to Housing Stability Council for approval. This may take a month or a little more, so please keep that timing in mind as you're planning your schedules. Once Housing Stability Council approves your project, your development officer will send that formal reservation of funds that kicks off the closing and the construction phase of your project. After this, you can get started with the closing process. You'll be responsible for opening and managing escrow. We'll be responsive to questions and provide necessary information and documents like invoices and escrow instructions. For this stage, we'll need to see that you've obtained insurance that meets our requirements and that your title report continues to be clean. This is also the stage where we'll engage with DOJ. Because we pass those charges through to you, we don't want to start incurring them until we actually have that more official commitment. So at this point, we'll finalize the legal documents with the project information, get approval from DOJ, and send them to you. Because you reviewed the templates during due diligence, there shouldn't be any surprises. If you had any edits, hopefully you would have already sent them to us, and we would have already provided them to DOJ, which means that hopefully we can get everyone on board with those documents quickly. You'll also need to pay a few charges during escrow. That'll be the reservation charge of 2% of the lift loan, the pass-through DOJ fees, and any document preparation charges. We can also provide a first draw of lift through escrow if you need to pay off any land or any invoices already incurred. I also wanted to flag here that if another funder of yours requires that you have a permit to close, we won't hold you to that actual closing hard deadline because we understand that permitting can take a long time. So instead, we'll want to see that all of the closing requirements listed in that top box are actually completed so that when you do get your permit, we can close ASAP. And I won't go into future stages. Those are discussed extensively during our lift training, but I did want to flag these timeline requirements. Your reservation kicks off the process. We'll need you to close by your closing deadline. You'll need to start vertical construction within 18 months of the reservation letter, complete construction of all homes within 36 months of the reservation letter, and have all your homes sold within 42 months of the reservation letter. We've got 12 minutes left. I think I can take a couple of questions if there are any.
Okay, here we go. Can you confirm that the concept proposal phase will not need to have evidence of construction financing like it has been required in previous years?
That's correct. We won't need that at concept proposal. We'll need it at stage 1 due diligence.
Great. And when is the subsidy layering review training in January? I'm not sure what this is referring to, but maybe you do, Jessica?
I'm not sure either. The subsidy layer review training?
Robin, maybe you could provide more details in the chat. Maybe it's through another division at OHCS. Oh, okay. Not necessarily. Okay. I'm going to move on to the next one. One more tiebreaker question. How are you going to deal with theoretical commitments, i.e. projects who say they're going to build efficient, sustainable, or accessible, but don't actually do it? Can organizations demonstrate a history of meeting those criteria?
So we don't have a request to demonstrate a history, but we do state very clearly that we will double check and make sure that those are actually there while completed. I don't know if this is getting too into the weeds, but our plan is essentially you make your promise during the tiebreaker, like with an energy efficiency thing. We'll ask a question about how you're implementing those in your quarterly reports moving forward. And then for projects for 2026 moving forward, the completion packet will have a list of all of the tiebreaker items, and you'll need to actually respond if you did include those things. And then if you didn't it'll be 3 years down the line, so it doesn't help the other applicants now. But if you didn't, then we'll basically, our plan is to take that point away from your next application. So if you say you'll do something that's worth 2 points on this application, and then you don't do those, the next application you submit will subtract 2 points from your tiebreaker score as a little bit of a penalty to just kind of balance things out for fairness. So it's a rough plan. This is kind of our pilot on this, so we'll see how it works. Since we only have 9 minutes left, if you don't mind, I'm going to run through the last of the slides, and then if there's time left, oh, I do see one hand. I'll answer one more question, Robin.
Hi. I just want to understand, like, if you're a 2027 applicant, you should go ahead and file the initial application. And then that's it. And then you just hold, you have that information. And then in September, you're going to do the release. And that's when you would do the concept, which would be due at the latest in April of 27. Do I have that time frame like correct?
Yeah, actually, this next section has a timeline in it. So
Oh, yay. Okay.
I can just
right.
jump into
Thank you.
Yeah. I'll start with 2027 then I'll back up to 2026, and then I'll finish out this section just so that we actually finish. So for 2027 projects, our NOFA will launch on the 26th of January 2026. The concept proposal will launch on February 9th, 2026, or I'm sorry, I guess let me back up. The NOFA will launch on January 26th, 2026, and we'll start taking intake, which is that online form. Then February 9th, 2026, we'll start accepting concept proposals. And if you're a 2027 project, you can start submitting your concept proposal this early, but you don't have to. On September 21st, 2026, we'll release those 2027 funds. We'll reset our wait list, and then we'll have that tiebreaker where unfunded 2026 projects and early submission 2027 projects will be considered in that tiebreaker. If there's still funding available, which I don't anticipate there will be, I expect all of the funding will be gone in that first day tiebreaker. But if there is, we will accept concept proposals until April 15th, 2027. And then also that April 15th, 2027 date is when the set-asides will merge. So if we don't get a lot of small emerging rural or culturally specific applicants, and there's still some funding left over, this is the date that we'll be able to move that into the general pool to fund the next project there. The final deadline for 2027 projects to complete due diligence is September 3rd, 2027, and then your closing deadline is December 17th, 2027. And then backing up to 2026 projects, yours is a lot easier. The NOFA launch and intake is January 26, 2026. We'll start accepting concept proposals on February 9th. You need to submit your concept proposal by May 3rd, 2026. If there's still funding available, just like with 2027, we'll merge the set-asides if there's anything left over. Your final deadline for due diligence is November 3rd, 2026, and then your closing deadline is going to be February 26th, 2027. And I know we're getting close, but I don't have that much more. So what can you do while you wait another week for the NOFA to launch? You can sign up for homeownership technical advisories and news. This is where we'll announce when the NOFA has been published. You can watch the LIFT training session recording, which has been posted to OHCS's YouTube. You can also read the old LIFT manual or wait and read the new one once it gets updated through a temporary rule change. You can review the list of required documents that we've shared and make sure that you know what they are. You can rough out your development schedule and decide if you'll be able to close in time to be a 2026 project, or if you need to wait and apply as a 2027 project. We recommend blocking off a sufficient amount of time on your calendar to complete the concept proposal. It's shorter than the full application, but still a considerable amount of work. And then we do have one more training on the 29th that'll focus more on technical aspects of the application, like the workbook, procorum, and the scoring criteria. So feel free to register for that. And then if you have any questions, don't hesitate to email us. And then if you're a little overwhelmed and this was a lot and you're not sure to do, you're not sure what to do after the NOFA launches, this is just a really simplified list. You should start by reading the NOFA. It is long, so make sure you set aside time. You should complete the online intake form. The earlier the better, so that you can get access to all those blank forms. And I wouldn't be mad if you filled it out before you finished reading the whole NOFA either. Attend the technical training that you already registered for. Take some time to get to know Procorum once you have access. Go ahead and download any blank application documents and forms that you'll need to fill out. Complete the application workbook and the partner experience workbook. That'll be most of your labor on this. Read and sign all the specific signature documents, and then just upload everything, check off all the tasks, double check that all the tabs in your workbook are done and all the documents in the document list are uploaded, and then click the submit button. And then we're short on time, so I won't go through a whole big spiel on what we can and can't answer for technical assistance, but we are here. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to email any of us. Your development officer doing due diligence, or me, or HO.development, just reach out. We're here to answer questions. Just one big flag, we cannot provide technical assistance or one-on-one technical assistance for any questions related to the tiebreaker. We want to avoid any potential risks of accidentally favoring one person over another. So if you have questions about the tiebreaker, we'll have to respond to that in an FAQ that's available to everyone on our website. And since we're running out of time, Talia, were you able to get that form set up?
Yes, I can launch it. And here's a question that maybe you can answer as I'm launching. After doing the intake form, is there any advantage if you're doing 2027 projects to do the concept proposal in January or February? Or is it the same playing field if you wait until the second release?
Good question. Anyone who submits between February, or, well, you can't do the concept proposal until February, but anyone who submits between February and the September launch will be treated equally. So as long as you submit anywhere in there, it's fine. And Talia is launching a form. It'll be a link in the website that's just a question about what you're most interested in learning at our technical training in a couple of weeks. That'll be a lot less formal than this one. It'll be more me driving around showing you what things look like. So if you respond to this, that'll help me prioritize and make sure that I'm actually hitting the things people want to learn.
Sorry, Jessica, the poll isn't loading.
Oh,
so I
darn.
might just put the options in the chat and people can let us maybe just copy and paste which ones you're interested in. I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
man.
sorry, we're having technical difficulties on that. We couldn't get the poll to work, and now the form's not working. So yeah, if you could put in chat, just even if it's not on our list, if you can just put in the chat what you're most interested in learning about. I think the options we had were like the scoring criteria, Procorum, the application workbook. Yeah, if there's really anything that you want us to dive into more, feel free to put it in the chat.
And here's a question, if you can, I know we're running out of time, but when would you, can you give a time frame of when you would receive confirmation that you've made it through the concept proposal phase / tiebreaker, maybe just for the 2026 projects.
Yeah.
I think it
So,
kind of, yeah, go for it.
so our goal is that we'll complete the concept proposals, or our review of the concept proposals within 10 business days of your submission, because they're shorter. There's not so many narratives that we need to review. But also, please give us a little bit of flexibility on that in the first, like after the first few days, because I know there's going to be a really big rush. So we'll do our best to get those reviewed. I'm not sure if you'll get a notification within those 10 business days, because we also need to give people a 10-day cure period. So maybe say a month max. That'll kind of be our goal on when you'll get notification on the concept proposal. I know we are past time, and I don't have any other content for you, but I can stay a little longer if there are any more questions. And if there aren't any other questions, I have a very pretty thank you slide. And if you want to leave, thank you for joining us today. And I'm really excited to learn about your projects and move forward with this NOFA. So I hope to see you again in 2 weeks and see your applications.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Great. All right, then since there's no other questions, I'll go ahead and end this call. So have a great day, everyone.